Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily News. I'm Nicholas Richardson. Exactly 80 years ago today, the Warsaw Uprising broke out, the largest uprising for independence in German-occupied Europe. The Poles had had enough of being under the German jackboot and wanted to free their capital from German occupation before the Soviet Red Army entered. The German criminals razed Warsaw to the ground. Our capital was to be a symbol of how rebellion against Hitler ends. But the city rose from the ashes and became a symbol of the heroic struggle. Today, to commemorate the rebels, a march was held through the streets of Warsaw, in which our reporter, Michał Jelonek, took part. What were the emotions of those who took part in today's march? Summer 1944. Germany was suffering mounting defeats on the Eastern Front. The Red Army had entered pre-war Poland. The underground state made the difficult decision to launch the Warsaw Uprising. The idea was to show the Soviets who was in charge and thus preserve sovereignty after the war. In fact, it was a battle aimed directly, militarily, at the Germans. But on a deeper level, it was about political hedging against the one who had been the aggressor before and was now entering the land of Poland as an ally of our allies. Although the first shots had already been fired, the uprising officially broke out at 5 p.m. on the 1st of August, now known as W Hour. The Germans had a huge advantage in training and weaponry, but the Poles managed to fight them on equal terms. That's why the uprising lasted for 63 days instead of just several. For a long time, the Warsaw Uprising was not fully known in the West, where it was the story of the Jewish ghetto uprising which took hold. The uprising was salt in the eyes of the Germans. Hitler needed a spectacular victory for propaganda purposes. The Polish capital was to be razed to the ground. The Germans slaughtered some 200,000 civilians. Erich von den Bach-Zelewski and Oskar Dirlewanger were the criminals directly responsible for the destruction of the capital. I worked with the Germans for a very long time, almost 20 years. I remember conversations with Germans about the Warsaw Uprising. They did not quite understand the Warsaw Uprising. They did not know much about it. The wounds inflicted by the German criminals have not healed to this day. The cessation of hostilities agreement was signed in Warsaw on the 2nd of October 1944 by Colonel Kazimierz Iranek Osmecki and Lieutenant Colonel Zygmunt Dobrowolski of the Home Army. The rebels and civilians were sent to a transitory camp in Pruszków. However, years later, the insurgents' idea prevailed and Poland is once again a sovereign state. The Warsaw Uprising is the moral foundation, the moral basis of our independence. Yes, the independence of today. Time is passing relentlessly. Every year there are fewer and fewer insurgents among us. Just today, the oldest participant in the uprising, Barbara Sowa, pseudonym Basha, died. Young people are showing that they have not forgotten their heroes and are organising to help them. Yes, on a daily basis, about 60 former insurgents in Warsaw receive rehabilitation, lunches and care from us. But we also respond to emergencies. We have applications. There are veterans all over Poland. Freedom is not given once and for all. In the face of Russian imperialism, the spectre of war is a real threat today. No one will give us freedom. Freedom must be fought for. Freedom must be won and freedom must be preserved. The heroes of the Warsaw Uprising will forever remain in our memory. Today, once again, the Warsaw Uprising marched through the streets of the capital at W Hour. People from all over Poland came together to sing patriotic songs. This is how true national unity is built. Paweł Błoch, TV Republika. This is not the end of the controversy at the Paris Olympics. After the scandalous parody of the Last Supper, things are now coming to a head over women's boxing. The reason for this is the progress of Algeria's Imane Khelif to the quarter-finals. Khelif was competing against women, despite DNA tests confirming that the Algerian competitor has male chromosomes. The fight itself ended after 45 seconds when Khelif's opponent tapped out after taking a powerful hit.
She did not shake hands with her rival. She cried. She was about to tell the coach that she had never been hit so hard before in her career. Italian fighter Angela Carini, after receiving a blow to the nose from the much physically stronger fighter Imane Khelif, asked for a break and surrendered the fight. This case caused so much outrage that Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni spoke on the matter. With such testosterone levels, This is not a fair competition. Male athletes are not allowed in women's competitions to protect the rights of female athletes. In addition to Khelif, the presence of Lin Yuting from Taiwan at the Olympics is also controversial. Both were disqualified by the International Boxing Organization last year. Test results allegedly showed that the athletes possessed male XY chromosomes. However, the International Olympic Committee does not recognize the boxing organization. When I fought Khelif, I felt different. Her punches hurt me a lot. I don't think I've ever felt like that in the ring. And let me remind you that I have been fighting for 13 years. It's pathetic that men become women to have an advantage in sports. In boxing or any other combat sport, this is a crime, it shouldn't happen. If they slip through and then get caught, they should be imprisoned. Irish boxer Kelly Harrington, an Olympic gold medalist, has stated that she will refuse to compete at these Olympic Games against any male opponents.
Coraz więcej jest takich przypadków. Widać.
There are more and more cases like this, and you can see the frustration of the athletes, no matter what sport. An athlete fighting against a person of the opposite sex contradicts the fundamental principles of competition. Therefore, there is an idea to create a new category in addition to those for men and women. However, this is a fool's errand. First of all, we have to fight against gender ideology. If someone would like to create a new category, of course they can, and they do already exist, but no one is applying to be in these categories. Well, because if a transgender person feels like a woman, then that person also wants to be treated like a woman. The presence of so-called political correctness at the Olympics or World Championships could lead to the demise of women's sports in short order. Allowing transgender athletes who identify as women to compete in women's sports at the Olympics is a Pyrrhic victory for transgenderism. The UN Special Reporter on Violence Against Women and Girls has praised the Italian athlete for her decision to stop the fight and has taken steps to ensure that the rights of all athletes comply with the Olympic Charter and health regulations. Łukasz Żmuda, TV Republika.
The State Electoral Commission has accepted the financial reports of all the election committees that ran in the autumn parliamentary elections, except for the Law and Justice Committee. There are still doubts there. The State Electoral Commission accepted the Civic Coalition's report despite numerous objections pointing to violations of 3 articles of the Electoral Code, including the public financing of the campaign of Donald Tusk's committee.
In the course of an interpellation, I obtained documents proving that in the course of these 4 months, almost 360 incidents occurred, amounting to 7 million zloty. There were, of course, events that officially promoted the Opolskie Voivodeship, but in reality, there was no lack of promotion of politicians at these events, especially the current marshal. Andrzej Buła of the Civic Platform organised picnics where, on the pretext of promoting the Opolskie Voivodeship, speeches from Donald Tusk's allies were broadcast. Can you imagine what would happen in Poland if the Law and Justice Party organised an event with public money, invited guests, and broadcast Kaczynski's speech? These are situations that cannot be compared with what PiS has been deprived of its subsidy for. The icing on the cake was a concert to the tune of 1,200,000 zloty, at which they urged people to vote for the Civic Coalition and insulted Law and Justice politicians. The statements made by the marshals were meant to welcome the audience who had come to the concert. They were spontaneous and accompanied by emotions related to the unique artistic event and the current political situation. This was the Deputy Marshal of the Opolskie Voivodeship's answer to the Council's questions. There are also serious legal doubts about Campus Poland, which was a venue for the promotion of Civic Coalition politicians, sponsored by the city of Olsztyn and the Germans, among others.
Campus Polska Przyszłości nie jest żadną promocją.
Campus Poland is not an advertisement for anyone. There are no party accents, and we made sure of that from the very beginning. However, the Adenauer Foundation and other organizations it supports are a matter of course, because we belong to the same political group. The campus was in politicians' interests. It took place during the election campaign, etc. The current government is determined to take money from Jarosław Kaczynski's party. Hence the pressure on members of the State Electoral Commission in this matter. In my opinion, everything points to Law and Justice breaking the law and misusing public funds to support its campaign. We have much evidence. The problem is that the evidence is flimsy, as members of the State Election Commission say. One of the key members may turn out to be Maciej Klisz, appointed by Poland 2050 to the State Electoral Commission. According to Interior, At the end of April, Klisch was appointed by Prime Minister Tusk to a position of Deputy Chairman of the Board of the National Development Bank, with a salary of over 100,000 zlotys per month. This raises the question of whether this will influence Klisch's decision in the State Electoral Commission. Klisch, who is a member of the National Electoral Commission and the Vice President of the Board of the National Development Bank, denies that he received the position from Tusk. Will you ask Interior for a correction? You know, it's a situation where I have nothing more to add at the moment. I have said what I had to say, and frankly, I have nothing more to say. Klisch is aware that there are many doubts about the picnics organised by both Law and Justice and Civic Coalition. It would be good if journalists put pressure on the authorities to change the electoral code so that certain things can be described more precisely. In general, the State Electoral Commission has very limited room for manoeuvre and, for example, there is a big problem with this kind of practice, which nobody seems to like. On the other hand, there are no specific rules that apply to this, and that applies to any party. The problem is that the Civic Coalition's report has been adopted and Law and Justice's has not. Klisch also destroys the current government's narrative that picnics organised by Law and Justice were illegal. The issue that needs to be clarified in relation to the last report has nothing to do with picnics, meetings with voters. What kind of things? It's a matter of asking the Government Legislation Centre and the Research and Academic Computer Network to answer certain questions about how certain elements work, and it has nothing to do with election picnics. About the Government Legislation Centre, the current government is accusing the Law and Justice Party of, among other things, handing out pens with the logo of the Government Legislation Centre as part of the election campaign, which did not encourage people to vote for a particular candidate, so the argument is simply weak. There are also allegations that employees do not come to work, but as the former head of the Government Legislation Centre points out, this is a lie, which can be confirmed by surveillance footage.
Te zarzuty absolutnie nie są prawdziwe.
These accusations are absolutely untrue. The truth is that the Government Legislation Centre worked in an exemplary manner. This is confirmed by the reports of the Supreme Audit Office and even by the resolution of the Parliamentary Committee on Administration and Internal Affairs for this term, from June this year. The Government Legislation Centre did not take part in my election campaign. And the employees came to work as usual? The employees came to work as usual and performed their duties according to the law, only during working hours. So what is the point? The whole operation is aimed at depriving the Law and Justice Party of subsidies, frightening the party, splitting it internally, depriving it of funds for the presidential campaign, and enabling Tusk to run unopposed next year. The point is not so much to defend oneself as to counterattack. And this is something the Law and Justice Party cannot afford if it wants to continue as it is after the presidential elections. Adrian Borecki, TV Republica.
Tensions are rising in the Middle East. Today, the Israeli army announced the elimination of the head of Hamas's military structures in Gaza. He is said to have been killed in an airstrike. Hamas militants vow bloody revenge. The Americans warn that the conflict, which has drawn in more and more countries in the region, could soon spiral into a full-scale war.
They haven't seen their loved ones for 300 days. They don't know where they are, if they are alive, and what the terrorists of Hamas have done to them. When they invaded Israel on October 7th last year, they brutally murdered people, including women and children, kidnapping hundreds deep into the Gaza Strip. 300 days. For someone, it's a number. For me, it's now a lifetime. I count down each day and always hope that I won't have to count anymore, because our children will come home. Israeli retaliation was bound to happen. The attack on Gaza is still ongoing. Yesterday, Israeli forces eliminated a Hamas leader. He died in rocket fire in Tehran. This is his funeral. Today, they announced the killing of the commander of the armed terrorist militia in Gaza, Mohammed Deif, considered number 2 in Hamas. The Israeli military had been hunting him for years, and he emerged unharmed from several ambushes. He was one of the main architects of the October attacks on Israel. Anyone who raises their hand against our children, who murders our citizens and destroys our cities, must expect to answer with their own blood. This is an adequate retaliation. Hamas is already announcing that it will unleash hell in the Middle East. Today, I call on all Hamas fighters and urge Iran to stand up to the enemy, who must feel our wrath. The enemy will not escape punishment. These are the most intense battlegrounds in the Middle East today. Israel, Gaza, the West Bank, Iran, and Lebanon, where age-old enemies clash. The specter of a full-scale war in the region is increasingly likely. The Americans are not expressing it directly yet, but are already warning us of it. It is urgent that all parties involved in the conflict decide whether they want to stay on a dangerous path of violence that could lead to something much worse. I am not in a position to predict how this will end. If a full-scale war were to break out in the region, the Americans would help Israel as it's their biggest ally. However, Israel's enemies would be helped by Turkey, which is NATO's second army. There's too much hatred and too many conflicting interests in the Middle East for there to be peace for long. Above all, this is a tragedy for ordinary people, regardless of which side they are on. Marcin Szewczak, TV Republika.
That's the news. Thank you for watching, and from me, it's have a good night and a better tomorrow.